Hey, welcome back, everybody. I know last time I read to you, it was New Year's Eve, and I hope you all had a wonderful New Year's celebration. I know I did. I was at a very good friend's house, threw back a couple beers, ate some a nacho bar, basically. They put aluminum foil down, spread around nachos and whatnot, and covered it in cheese and stuff like that. But yeah, anyway, Fiercely Happy, Jenny Lawson, Chapter 16. Welcome back, my friends. So here we go. I've always been a fan of therapy. You spend an entire hour talking about yourself and someone has to fake being fascinated by the strange assemblage that is you. I shop around for great therapists the way drug addicts shop around for doctors who doctors with loosened prescription pads. I'm not looking for drugs, I'm looking for good actors, or people so boring that my life actually seems interesting to them. Either way, I'm not picky. I enjoy therapy so much that I'm constantly trying to get Victor, her husband, if you remember correctly, to go. But he won't. Finally, I said that we're going to a marriage counselor, so that way he'd have to go and I could watch. I was like a shrink voyeur. Victor was against it until I explained that the therapist is like a referee who could decide which of us was the most wrong in recurring arguments we'd been having over and over for the last 20 years. Usually, when we're in a fight, I'd end up saying something like, if we were on Jerry Springer, everyone would be booing you right now. But Victor doesn't watch Jerry Springer, so instead I moved to, if we were at a therapist, she'd be shaking her head at you in disappointment and throwing dollar bills at me in appreciation for my seemingly inhumane patience. She was like an imaginary friend who was always on my side and who had more education than either of us. Eventually, Victor called my bluff and set us up with a therapist himself, which was what I wanted until it actually became a reality. The shrink set it up so that Victor would go first and then I would come alone to talk the next week. This sounded perfectly reasonable until the moment Victor left for his appointment, and then I immediately imagined every terrible secret he was telling her. I'd never even had a chance to charm this doctor with my, according to my last shrink's level of attention, fascinating tales of being me, and Victor was going to ruin my chances of her ever liking me by telling her about the surprise funeral I'd accidentally crashed last week. It wasn't like a surprise party funeral. The funeral had been planned. The surprise was really on me. Surprise, you're at a funeral. It was the closest I'd ever been to a surprise party, but with more corpses than I have expected. In a nutshell, I stopped at a nearby cemetery because I love the quiet, but unfortunately, I unwittingly pulled into the cemetery minutes after a funeral procession had pulled in. I would have driven off, but the small cemetery road was full of mourners and parked cars, and a cemetery worker directing traffic motioned for me to park there and join them. Then I panicked and waved him off like, oh no, I couldn't. But when I turned to reverse, I saw a line of cars right behind me, and that's when I realized I was fucked. Apparently, the funeral procession had been separated by a red light, and I'd managed to wedge myself right in the middle of it, and that's how I found myself stuck in my car, accidentally held hostage by mourners. I wanted to explain that I was just browsing, but thought it would sound weird, so I got out and went to the funeral, which was odd because I avoid most social associations of people I know and love. And here I was, willingly participating in the burial of a dead stranger. I was like the Patty Hearst of funerals. Plus, Victor kept calling me to see where I was, but I couldn't answer my phone because I'm pretty sure it's poor etiquette to take a call in the middle of a funeral you weren't even invited to. This does have some humor for you guys that might be just joining us in. I recommend going back and listening to the first few chapters leading up to this, the first 15 to be exact. When I got back home, Victor was all, I've been worried sick. Where have you been? And I was like, Don't yell at me. I was at a surprise funeral and I'm feeling very vulnerable. And then I said I wasn't allowed to drive unsupervised anymore because apparently normal people don't allow themselves to go obstructed by funerals. It was exactly the sort of thing Victor would bring up in therapy without the proper context. The entire next week, I was a wreck. Victor refused to tell me what he talked about with the therapist, and I thought I was insane for even asking. He looked unconvinced when I told him that I'd stab him in the knee if he didn't tell me what he'd told her, but I suspected he'd write all this down for the next session. Finally, it was time for me to go visit the therapist myself. She looked like kind of a shrink who would make you hold a speaking stick and play the emotion bongos, but I didn't care because I immediately launched into a very long and random speech about how Victor was not to be trusted because who gets mad at someone for attending a funeral? Crazy people who want you to question your own sanity. That's who. Then the therapist interrupted me to tell me that Victor had only said nice things about me and then it was obvious that he adored me. Then I accused her of being some sort of plant because a real psychiatrist would have picked up the fact that Victor had obviously done this entire thing on purpose to make me think I was gaslight crazy. The bingo lady, I refused to refer to her as a doctor after that, revealed, page turn here, nothing but poised her pen to write down on her pad. Shit, that's wrong. Shit, that's wrong with people, as she asked a benign question. Sorry, I had to make sure I actually turned the page right. That wasn't matching up, but apparently it is. I've been to therapy enough to know the tricks, and I was aware that shrinks never write something down when you've said something truly crazy because then you'll know it's crazy. Instead, they wait until they ask the next easier question and then write down the notes. I assume it's to put you at ease, but it's just the opposite for me because I want to call them out on it, but then they'll add paranoid to my list of problems. So while she settled in to write down her notes, I answered her easy blow-off question, do you like your job? By saying, if I was a serial killer, I'd leave a note on my victim saying I only stab assholes. So just don't be a dick and you'll be fine. Hugs, tiny babies. I think that's the best name for a serial killer because the news anchor has to say people across the nation are still terrified of tiny babies and tiny babies suspected of stabbing assholes. Police encourage you to remain calm and take standard safety precautions against tiny babies. Lock your doors and stop being such a jerk. And the newspaper headlines would be like, tiny babies still at large. Protect yourself from tiny babies. I paused and looked over to see the therapist just staring at me in confusion. I felt bad because she'd probably already forgotten the last thing she needed to write and now would have to ask even more benign questions in order to capture all of her other stuff I just said. Luckily, we were at the end of our session. She didn't have a secretary, so I paid her directly, which is always awkward because basically this is the person I'm choosing to divulge my deepest, darkest secrets to, and then, in the end, I have to pay her $200 to make up for her having listened to me. It's pretty much the most unhealthy relationship ever, and one that probably needs therapy. It seems at the very least counterintuitive to see a shrink for her low self-esteem, and after an hour of their convincing, you know how worthwhile you are, and they end the session by telling you that you owe them a lot of money for that. I wonder if shrinks are ever so good that their low self-esteem patient says, nope, not this time, doc. My problems were so fascinating that this time I'm billing you. I'm not sure if a psychiatrist would consider this success, but it seems like one to me. I immediately went home and told Victor I didn't appreciate being punked like that, and he seemed innocently baffled. And then when we got in a fight about how wrong it was for him to pretend I was a nicer person in therapy, that's when Victor and I had a problem and realized that I was perhaps too crazy for therapy, or at least too crazy for couples therapy. He was right, and that was the last time we ever saw that therapist. Instead, we just came up with some rules to get us through the rest of our marriage. Basically, I promised to stop leaving half-drunk cups. Yeah, half-drunk cups. That didn't make sense to me when I read it, but leaving half-drunk cups of water all over the house, and Victor promised to forgive me when I inevitably still left half-drunk cups all over the house. It was a weird arrangement, but we were both happy with it, oh my goodness, we were both happy with it, and it's sometimes you have to find what works for you. Occasionally, I'm tempted to stop by the marriage counselor's office and tell her that we're still happily married. But then I think that she probably really enjoys telling people that they have a great marriage compared to the crazy couple with the surprise funeral story who never even got out of the first month of therapy without imploding. I suspect telling her that we were okay without therapy might fuck up her stories. So I leave it alone because I'm a good person, at least according to my new therapist. That was kind of a tongue twister for myself. I thank you guys for hanging out towards the end here. Sometimes I get ahead of myself, and my brain is 5 words or a sentence done, but my eyes are still back on 5 words or a sentence before. So, like, my brain is ahead, my eyes are behind, and I can't read that fast. But anyway, sorry for wasting the last 12 minutes and so seconds of your life. But chapter 17 coming up very soon. I know I probably say this all the time, but I really want to get on reading this book, maybe 1 chapter a day. But anyway, I'll see you guys on the next chapter. Take care, guys. Y'all be good.